This may not be your dream home. It may not be your forever home. It's just over 700 square feet with one bedroom, one bath. Just enough room for two people to begin their life together. And it got me wondering, in America, where are the homes like this today? What happened to our starter homes? For a long time, the idea of a starter home was pretty simple. It wasn't necessarily your big, flashy dream home or the place you'd be in forever, but simply a place to begin your life. Throughout the years, though, that idea seems to have changed. I just don't see that many starter homes in my area anymore. Maybe they're not economically feasible and housing developments just don't build them anymore. Maybe new houses gradually got bigger and more expensive. The idea of buying a small plot of land and building a house on it became a relic of the past. Maybe also our expectation changed on what we think we need. And maybe builders stopped building smaller homes because people just stopped buying them. Or maybe, most likely, it's probably a little bit of all of these things. Whatever the reason, I found myself wondering, what did a starter home actually look like? I started digging through some old house plan books I have, looking for some perspective, and that's when I found this little floor plan called the Buffalo Cottage. When I first saw it, I couldn't help but imagine these people it must have been designed for. Maybe they had just gotten married. Maybe they'd spent several years saving for their first house. Maybe they were standing in a sales office somewhere, pointing at this exact drawing and saying, "This is the one." I don't know, but I like thinking about the people behind these old plans because I'm reminded that architecture has never really just been about floor plans. It's about the lives that could happen inside them. So I wanted to sketch out the original plan to better understand the idea. Partly because I enjoy drawing, but mostly because it forces me to slow down. When you trace someone else's work line by line, you start noticing things you probably would have missed otherwise. The proportions of the rooms, their relationships, and those little decisions that don't pop out when you're just looking at a printed floor plan. Maybe this is a mental relic of my old handdrafting days, but it seems to work for me. But as I sketched this one out, I took note of just how efficient it was, right? There's very little wasted space, and the rooms were just super simple. Nothing feels overly extravagant, and everything feels like it had a purpose. But of course, there's a few things that stand out immediately. There's only one bedroom, and 0 bathrooms. And it feels really cramped, especially for such a small footprint. But I resisted the urge to think about what I'd changed just yet, because I found that if I start redesigning too early, I stop paying attention to why the original architect maybe made these decisions that they did. And whether I end up agreeing with them or not, I think it's important to first understand the design before trying to modify it. So once I felt I understood the original, I laid out another sheet of paper on top of it, and now came the interesting part. My goal wasn't to design a starter home that I'd want, it was to design the best house I thought that same couple from that book could realistically build today. I could easily double the size of the building, add more bedrooms, a garage, a home office, a giant kitchen island, but then what would I have? Another developer's idea of a starter home that the couple couldn't even afford anymore. So I gave myself one rule. I should only change what really needs to change to make it work for today, but still keep it a starter home. The most important thing I considered is how to add the ever-important bathroom. This is probably the biggest challenge because I wanted it to feel like it had always belonged there instead of looking like an addition squeezed into the plan. I added it in the back near the kitchen where the plumbing already is, and in a place where it doesn't change the overall form and look of the front facade. I also knew from the beginning that I wanted to push out the rear porch and add a small mudroom or laundry area at the back of the house. Not because those spaces are exciting, they're actually some of the least interesting rooms to design, but they're part of living today, and I wanted to make the house feel more complete. I also know the idea of a one-bedroom house in today's world can be a bit limiting. And that can make things like working from home, transitioning to a very small family, or even just having a place to check out for a minute difficult. So I added a small flex room off the living room that could function as multiple things, maybe an office for work, a hobby room, or whatever life changes come up. At this point, the sketch was really just testing ideas. Some of them would live on in the final design, and some of them won't, and that's okay. I've learned not to get too attached to anything on paper, because the computer and the 3D model, it has a way of telling you when something doesn't actually work. So now it's time to see if the sketch actually works. I started by recreating the original house exactly as it was drawn. Walls, doors, windows, just mapping out the spaces. One thing I like about modeling old floor plans is that they almost always show me something I didn't notice on paper. The rooms sometimes feel larger, or in this case smaller, than I expected. The hallways can feel more narrow and a bit more cramped than maybe I'd imagined in plan. Or a window ends up framing something I never thought it would. Two-dimensional drawings only tell part of the story. It's not until you can actually stand inside the house that you begin to understand it. As the doors and windows started going in, I kept thinking about that bedroom. It just didn't feel right, walking into the house and bam, bedroom door. I'll revisit this later and reposition the door, but moving the doorway won't be a dramatic change. And most people probably wouldn't even notice it unless they compared the plans. But every time I walked through that front door, I felt like it needed to change. Instead of arriving into someone's private space, you should probably arrive in like an entry area or the living room. I don't know if that's objectively better. It just felt more natural to me. I don't know. Would you keep the door right in the front or put it to the side like I did? As I started modeling the roof, I had to take a quick second to understand the original design. The original drawing appears to have almost no overhang, and I'm not sure whether that was intentional, like whether it was simply a way to reduce construction costs or whether it was just the way the illustrator drew it. Whatever the reason, adding even a modest overhang would have completely changed the character of the house. Not just because it might help with shading, but also because it creates shadows and depth, a little more shelter, even if just psychologically. It's funny how some of the smallest decisions end up changing how the house feels. Once the original design was finished, I started replacing the parts that I needed for the new version, one wall at a time. And this is often where the computer and reality might start disagreeing with earlier me. Something that maybe looked perfectly reasonable on paper suddenly feels awkward once you're standing inside of it and you actually have to walk through the spaces. Sometimes it's frustrating, but it's also one of my favorite parts of the process. So I started with the bathroom, and the bathroom actually fit better than I expected, but it did end up taking up more room than I thought. I tucked it in the back corner where I could share plumbing with the kitchen. That seemed like the simplest solution without changing the footprint too much. Again, the goal wasn't to make this house bigger, it was just to make it feel more complete. The added room, the flex room, the office, hobby room, whatever you call it, it went off to the side, and this is probably the thing that changed the look of the building the most, and I'm still not sure if it's the right answer here. Maybe for a starter home, you don't need this extra room, or maybe having that extra space would make a huge difference. Either way, I added it in here, but it's something that we could easily take away if we decided it wasn't worth it. So besides the added square footage for the extra room in the bathroom, there were little tweaks that I did to the floor plan just to make it a little more usable. Doing little things like increasing the bedroom size for new modern beds and tweaking the bathroom dimensions for today's fixtures and eliminating these claustrophobic entries that make the house feel a little more current. The kitchen, though, it kept changing. When I first modeled it, I opened it completely to the living room. That seems to be the default answer today. Small house, open everything up. But as I walked through the 3D model, the more the kitchen started taking over the house. It stopped feeling like two connected rooms and it felt like just one big kitchen. So I started putting walls back in. Not many, but just enough to give each room its own identity again. Now the bar seating still lets the spaces connect. You can still talk while cooking, you still borrow light from one room to the other, but the living room gets to be a living room again. I'm curious where you fall on this. If you had a house this size, would you leave it completely open, or would you rather have a little separation between the spaces? One thing I kept reminding myself throughout all of this was that I wasn't designing my ideal house. That's a completely different project. I was trying to design a house that this couple could actually begin their life in. And every time I found myself thinking about adding another feature, another room, another few hundred square feet, I had to keep asking myself, is this still a starter home? I'm not exactly sure where the line is, but I knew I didn't want to cross it. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, even if we started building houses like this again tomorrow, that doesn't suddenly make them affordable. And you're right, a floor plan can't fix land prices, interest rates, zoning, construction costs. But I do think architecture still has a role to play. If we're serious about building smaller homes again, then we should probably spend just as much time thinking about what they actually need as we do about what they don't. I thought I was done modeling, and then I noticed something. Actually, something I had planned from the very beginning. When I first started redesigning this house, one of the first things I did was to push the stairs back so I'd have room for a little mudroom and laundry. And somewhere between modeling and adding furniture and getting real excited about the interesting parts of the design, I completely forgot to build it. So back we go. It probably says something that the least interesting rooms are also the ones easiest to forget. But modern houses will need them. Laundry, mechanical, storage. They don't make the cover of architecture magazines, but they do make the house work. And I oftentimes tend to forget about these spaces because they're sort of back of mind. These are early conceptual designs that I put together, and we would have caught this when we got into construction documents, but oftentimes I have to remind myself and slow down and remember to put in those utility functions. But once those spaces are finally in place, the floor plan felt mostly complete. To finish it out, I started laying out the furniture. This is usually the point where the house stops feeling like a floor plan and more like a house. As I placed the sofa, chairs, desk, I found myself thinking about that young couple again. Would they eat breakfast together at the little bar before leaving for work? Would they sit out on the porch in the evenings? Would they eventually outgrow the house? Or would they stay here for 20 years? I'm not sure. It's interesting how quickly furniture turns the drawing into somebody's life. And it also answers some practical questions. Can you actually move around the bed? Does the living room feel comfortable? Those are things the floor plan can't always tell you. The last step was giving the house some personality. I wanted to keep things simple. Warm cream siding, not millennial gray or bright red, just an understated backdrop color. White trim with wood floors. Nothing that tried too hard, just a modest little house that felt attainable. I've been thinking lately that not every house has to be remarkable. Sometimes being comfortable or welcoming or well proportioned, that can be enough. So I tried to carry that same feeling into the redesign. Not luxurious, not trendy, just a place that feels like home. At the beginning, I was essentially redesigning an old floor plan. But by the end, I realized I had spent most of my time thinking about modern expectations instead. Some things have obviously changed over the last 100 years. We expect bathrooms, laundry, heating and cooling, more storage. And those aren't luxuries anymore, they're just simply part of living today in America. But what if something else changed too? Did our starter homes disappear? Or did our idea of what a starter home should be slowly change? I'm not sure there's a simple answer. Maybe houses became larger because families wanted more space. Maybe builders couldn't make money building smaller homes. Maybe our lives really do require more than they did 100 years ago. Or maybe we've reached the point where our first home is expected to do the job of our last home. I personally still live in my first house. It wasn't this small, but it's not certainly huge. And life has changed for me since I first bought it, but in the end, the house changed with us. We didn't need a huge house, we just needed a place to begin. And maybe that's what a starter home has always been. Not a destination, just the beginning of the story. A beginning that everybody should be given the opportunity to have. So now I'm curious. If someone offered you this house today, a little bit small, but just what you need, would you buy it? Or have our expectations changed so much that this no longer feels like a starter home? I really want to hear what you think. Thanks for coming along with me on this. As always, stay curious and design with intent.